Hi, my name is Jake, and I am a bookish drummer. So this video is going to be my May wrap-up. All the books that I read in the month of May. If I remember to do so, I will put up a bunch of stats right here. You can take a gander. I'm not sure what they're going to be, but they're going to be right here. Hopefully this actually goes in the video, or else this is just going to be me looking like a dumbass. But anyway, I've got a lot of books to talk about here. Some of them I really love, some of them I don't. Either way, let's jump right into it. I did have one DNF this month, so let's get that over with. And that would be The Last Mrs Parrish. I was very excited to read this book. I heard nothing but great things about it. I even put it in my 5-star predictions video. But unfortunately, I DNF'd it very quickly. I got like maybe 50, 60 pages in, and I just couldn't take it anymore. It was, first of all, it was so boring. Second of all, the dialogue was horrendous. Like, people don't talk like this. At least I hope not. Good Lord. I couldn't take it anymore. I had to put it down, and I will be unhauling this, so whoever wants to read this, they can go read it, because I am getting rid of it. First book I have here is Breach of Peace by Daniel Green. While I didn't love this book, I only gave it 2 stars. I can definitely see room for improvement for Daniel's writing style. My major issues with the book. My main issue with the book is that it's definitely categorized as fantasy, whereas I feel like it's more of a horror detective story. And I feel like if I went into this book knowing that it was more like that than a fantasy, I would have had the right expectations and I would have gone into it with a different mindset. But what we got instead, I thought it was going to be fantasy, but pretty much there's no real fantasy elements besides maybe like 1 or 2 things. This definitely feels like our world, and the people don't talk in a very unique way. They just talk like we do. So for his next novella, I really hope that he kind of accentuates like this being a fantasy world and introducing fantasy elements to a fantasy story. So that was my main complaint. But, the writing, for a debut, it was fine. It was serviceable. Definitely has room for improvement. Next book I have here, I also gave 2 stars, and that would be the short story collection 3 Blind Mice by Agatha Christie. Now, I love Agatha Christie's novels, for the most part. I usually give her novels anywhere from like 3 to 5 stars. But I'm just not a huge fan of her short story collections, for whatever reason. And it's weird because I love fantasy, sci-fi, and horror short stories. But for some reason, I can never get into like mystery short stories. I don't know. I don't know what the deal is, but this is no different. I gave this book 2 stars. I read all the short stories, including the very famous 3 Blind Mice. I didn't really care for it. That's all I got. This next book that I have to talk about, even though I did enjoy it overall, I only gave it 3 stars, and it's probably my biggest disappointment for the month. And I'll get a little bit more into that, and that would be Arm of the Sphinx, which is the 2nd book in the Sinlin book series. I think quartet, maybe? Either way, I liked this book considerably less than the first book, Sinlin Ascends. I gave this book 4.5 stars, whereas I gave this book 3 stars. I hear a lot of people on BookTube say that they love this book even more than the first book because you get more character perspectives, whereas in the first book, you only get the story through Sinlin's perspective. But I kind of have the opposite view. I feel like this book was hindered because of the other point of views we get. I loved the Sinlin, well, basically I just love Sinlin in this book. And then in this book, we get, probably the majority of the chapters through his perspective, but we also get characters that, while they are good, I just don't care enough about them to want the story told through their perspective. So I think I definitely have an unpopular opinion when it comes to this book. I did enjoy it though. I gave it 3 stars. And the very last chapter of the book, in fact, like the very last page, definitely has me intrigued to continue with the series. So hopefully this is just middle book syndrome. And hopefully the Hod King will be great. Hopefully. The next book I have to talk about is The Goblin Emperor, which I gave this book 3.5 stars. I basically bought this book one day on Amazon just because it was really cheap. I got it for like $6 brand new. And I had heard of the book before, like I've heard the title, but I didn't really know what it was about. So I went into this book completely blind. And while it was good, I gave it 3.5 stars. And the main character that we get the whole story through their eyes is very good, and he was very compelling. My main issue with the book is that it's incredibly slow-paced. Basically, in the first, 200, 250 pages, not much happens. Which makes sense because it's a very politically driven book, and there's a lot of politicking going on. And, for people who love that, they're going to love this book because that's all this book is. But for me, I'm not quite sure what I was expecting, but it wasn't quite this. It did start to pick up a little bit though. Like something happens around the 300 page mark where I'm like, ooh, that's interesting. But overall, I was slightly underwhelmed. I did really enjoy the main character though, which is why I gave it 3.5 stars. I think there's a sequel coming out. I'm not sure if I'm too interested in it. We'll see. But overall, The Goblin Emperor is good. And if you're into politics, definitely check it out because that's basically what this book is. The next book I have to talk about is The Perfect Child, and I gave this book 4 stars. Basically, this book is about a sociopathic little girl who likes to mess with her mom and just basically ruins her life, and so much crazy crap happens in this book. And it's very similar to one of my all-time favorite horror books, Baby Teeth. I love this book, and they have very similar plots. And I gave this book 5 stars. I gave this book 4 stars. I feel like it's like a chicken and egg kind of deal, though. If I would have read this book first, maybe I wouldn't have liked this book more. I'm not sure, but this book, I don't know. This book definitely has more of an edge to it, where this book, I don't know, it feels a little bit more clinical. I'm not sure if that's the right word, but I just don't like it as much as Baby Teeth. It was pretty good, though. I'm glad I read it. Probably not a book that I'm ever going to read again because, like I said, it's so similar to Baby Teeth that, I'm just going to read this book again and again because I love it so much. I'll probably actually unhaul this book, even though I did enjoy it. Oh well. The next book I have to talk about is The Sundown Motel, and I gave this book 4 stars, and I very much enjoyed it. I actually enjoyed it slightly more than The Perfect Child. This is basically a haunted house ghost story where you actually get 2 different timelines. You get the present day, where this girl is thinking about her aunt that disappeared in the 80s, and then the other timeline is with that aunt who disappeared in the 80s. So you get back and forth, And I will say the best thing about this book, I didn't really think it was that scary, but I actually loved the characters, especially the female characters. They were a highlight of the book. It was a little creepy at times, but basically, for me, it wasn't that scary. And the very ending of the book was a little messy, whereas like the rest of the book was pretty well paced, especially with the jumping back and forth between the timelines. And like I said, I like the characters in this book, and the plot was pretty good. The ending's a little sloppy, and that's pretty much it. I highly recommend it, though, for people who love ghost stories. It's a very good one. This next book I technically didn't finish in May, but I'm including it here because I basically read like 95% of it in May, so what of it? I'm talking about Age of Legend, which is the 4th book in Michael J. Sullivan's Legend of Empire series. I ultimately gave this book 4 stars, and it's the 4th book in a series, and the 4th book in a 6-book series, so I'm pretty close to the end. I will say this is nowhere near my favorite in the series. I probably like the 1st and the 3rd book more than this book, but overall I think it's better than the 2nd book, Age of Swords. Still has terrific character work, as always, with Michael J. Sullivan. The world building is great. We find out a little bit more about the world, and there's definitely like individual scenes that are very good. I had some slight issues with the pacing, which is weird because it's actually the shortest book in the series so far. So, doesn't quite make sense, but it's there. Also, there's an aspect of this book that I can't really get into because of spoilers, but one of my favorite characters is basically locked up in a cage for the majority of the book, and I kind of thought that was a waste of potential for that character. I didn't really like that aspect of the story, but, you know, everything else was pretty good. And like I said, you find out a lot more about some stuff that goes on. You know, it's the 4th book in a series. I can't really talk about it that much. The next book I have to talk about is by Haruki Murakami, and that would be After the Quake. This is a very short story collection that kind of loosely ties in with an earthquake that happened in the 90s. I had very low expectations for this book because a lot of the times Haruki Murakami's novels are very weird and absurd, and they're very bingeable, but his short stories can often be very mundane. But I actually really enjoyed this collection. Even though a lot of them were mundane, I liked the characters and their dialogue and what they were talking about, and I definitely got the feeling that whatever kind of message Haruki Murakami was trying to get with the reader, I kind of understood most of what was going on. And there's one short story in here, and I was reading this on a plane, and after I read the first paragraph, I literally laughed out loud on a plane. I said that a lot of his short stories can be very mundane, but then when I got to this book, the short story, it's called Super Frog Saves Tokyo. And here's the first paragraph. Katagiri found a giant frog waiting for him in his apartment. It was powerfully built, standing over 6 feet tall on its hind legs. A skinny little man no more than 5'3", Katagiri was overwhelmed by the frog's imposing bulk. "Call me Frog," said the frog in a clear, strong voice. I read that and I just burst out laughing. I was like, what the hell is going on? But yeah, this was probably the biggest surprise of the month. I definitely thought I wouldn't like it and maybe even DNF it, but I quite enjoyed it. I gave it 4.5 stars. There's 6 stories in here. Not all of them are super great. I think there's one in here that was like, meh, it was fine. But overall, this was great. And very short, and I managed to read most of it on my plane ride. And that's always fun. The next book I have to talk about is The Butterfly Garden, which is a very disturbing horror novel, which I gave 4.5 stars. This is a very unique story, at least in the way that it's told. It's about this. It's very hard to describe because I really don't want to give too much away. If you're really into like dark, disturbing horror novels, I would just say go ahead and get this because it's one of the best. But if you want to know kind of the gist of it, it's about this guy who kidnaps young women, probably in like their 20s, and he keeps them at this place in his mansion, and he slowly kind of like tattoos their backs to make them look like butterflies, and eventually when they get to the right age, he kills them and preserves them and in his butterfly garden. And we get the perspective of a woman who's basically escaped after something happens at this mansion, and she's telling these two detectives basically how she lived in the years that she was there, what she had to go through, and it was very uniquely told, and I very much enjoyed it, even though, like I said, it was very disturbing. It surprised me when I found out that this book is a part of a trilogy, or I think there might even be a quartet. I don't know, but I'm not really enticed to read the rest of the books. I'm not even sure how there would be more books, but either way, this is a great book just to read on its own. So, like I said, if you're into dark, disturbing stories, definitely give this one a go. Another book I have to talk about is A Memory Called Empire, which is a great sci-fi debut. I gave this book 4.5 stars. I heard this book compared often to one of my all-time favorite fantasy books, City of Stairs, by Robert Jackson Bennett, and I can definitely see the similarities, even though they are a little different. The similarities are definitely there. With this book, I basically loved almost everything about it, including the characters and the culture clashing with the person who is arriving at this new place and then kind of like learning about the culture and the naming process for these people is very unique. Also, probably my biggest surprise of this book, I kind of went into this book thinking that it was going to be a little bit more dry and serious in tone, but there's a lot of humor in this book. I laughed out loud a couple times in this book, which was very surprising. And once you kind of figure out what exactly is going on in the book and you get a little deeper into it, it's very good. It's a very fun and gripping sci-fi debut, and really even before I finished the book, I went ahead and bought the second book on Amazon, and I've been wanting to read it, but also I kind of want to read it in June so I can get points for it for the readathon. So I need to jump into that as quickly as possible. But yeah, I love this book. 4.5 stars. The last two books I have to talk about are both 5-star books. I'm just trying to decide which one of them I like more. Oh boy. My gut's telling me to talk about this book first, so I'll listen to my gut. And one of the books that I gave 5 stars is You Love Me by Caroline Kepnes. This is the third book in the Joe Goldberg series, and I gave it 5 stars. Actually, did I though? Did I give this 5 stars? Why am I asking you? Actually, yeah, I gave this book 4.5 stars. So I only gave one book 5 stars. So I'm a liar. I gave this book 4.5 stars, and it was a terrific read. The ending was a little, I don't know, I feel like it came out of nowhere. And obviously, just the nature of these books, you realize that they can't have like happy endings, but just the way that it all went down, I was kind of like, really? That's how it's going to play out? But overall, this whole book was just amazing, and the pacing was really good, And the character work, Joe Goldberg is in a new town, of course, and the characters are all, even though they're kind of normal people, they're despicable, and you hate them, even though Joe Goldberg is literally a criminal and a murderer. You can't help but kind of root for him and kind of feel empathy for his disgust of these people because they do kind of suck. But yeah, basically like 98, 99% of this book is great. The very ending is a little wonky for me, but oh well, I don't really read the books for the endings. I just kind of read them because they're hilarious. They're very good, dark comedies, and that's why I read them. And I gave this book 4.5 stars. So actually, the only book that I ended up giving 5 stars to this month was The Burning God by R.F. Kuang, the finale of the Poppy War trilogy. And probably the reason why I was trying to decide which one of them I liked more, even though, this was 5 stars and You Love Me was 4.5 stars, is because both of their endings, I don't even see. The problem is the ending of this book and the ending of the trilogy. I still don't know how to feel about it. I finished this book about a month ago, like the very beginning of May. I finished it. I'm still conflicted about it. I don't know how to feel. And I've never really had a book do that to me before. I either am like, yes, great ending, or I'm like, no, terrible ending. With this book, I have no idea if I like it or not. I'm so conflicted. And it sucks because this book as a whole, I've heard people say that it's not great, but for me, like the first, like 99% of the book is terrific. And just the very ending, I don't know how to feel. I'll probably just have to read it again, and knowing what I know about the series, I just don't even know what to say. I guess I should just end it there. A great book. I gave it 5 stars, even though I still don't know how to feel about the ending. The very ending. It's still one of my favorite trilogies of all time. I don't know. Whatever. So those are all of the books that I managed to get to in the month of May. Here they all are in their glory. I don't know. But yep, those are all the books that I managed to finish in the month of May. Most of them I pretty much enjoyed. Some of them weren't my cup of tea, but overall, I had a pretty good reading month. And of course, please let me know if you've read any of these books before, whether you loved them, you hated them, or you're kind of mad about them. Either way, let me know down in the comments below. And of course, if you enjoyed the video, please give it a thumbs up and consider subscribing to my YouTube channel. Thank you so much for watching and have a terrific day.